is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Live from London, this is The World Today.
Hello, I'm Jamie Owen. Welcome to the program. Our top stories. China tells the US Treasury Secretary relations must get back on track. Janet Yellen says the United States wants to diversify rather than decouple. Our other headlines, Germany says it won't send cluster bombs to Ukraine, just as the United States confirms it's considering doing so. South Korea backs Japan's plan to release treated radioactive water into the ocean, but China extends food import bans. And the race to rescue the missing from deadly flooding in China before more heavy rain arrives this weekend. China's Premier Li Qiang says China and the United States should seek consensus on the major economic issues during talks with visiting US Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen. Yellen says a decoupling of the US and Chinese economies would destabilize global markets. She said Washington wants healthy competition while also calling for reforms in the treatment of American companies. The Treasury Secretary is on a 4-day visit to Beijing. Well, let's talk to our correspondent, Zheng Chungying, in Beijing. It's been a packed day for Yellen. Talk us through it.
Yes, thanks indeed. It's been a packed day. And one of the biggest highlights on Yellen's agenda today is definitely her meeting with Chinese Premier Li Qiang earlier today, where both of them agreed to strengthen cooperation to seek opportunities for win-win economic cooperation. Premier Li expressed hope to bring China-U.S. economic ties back on track as soon as possible, calling for more efforts to seek consensus in many important aspects. And Yellen also said that the United States does not seek decoupling from China and is willing to work together with China to implement the consensus reached by the two heads of state in Bali. Let's take a listen.
I also think that a shift toward I've made clear that the United States does not seek a wholesale separation of our economies. We seek to diversify and not to decouple. The decoupling of the world's two largest economies would be destabilizing for the global economy, and it would be virtually impossible to undertake.
Yellen is viewed, it's not the first time that Yellen has called for improving bilateral economic ties between the world's two largest economies. Yellen is always seen as a pragmatic and rational U.S. officials. She has called for healthy relationship for many times between the two countries, adding that decoupling from China would be disastrous. So it's hoped by some that her visit to China will get China-U.S. relations back on at least a less hostile footing, which is in line with the interests in both countries. And as Yellen put it in her tweet recently, today, her visit is going to seek a healthy economic competition that benefits American workers and firms and to collaborate on global challenges. Specifically, the U.S. hopes to persuade China to refrain from reducing its holdings of U.S. Treasury bonds and instead increase them at the appropriate time to help the U.S. address inflation issues and to promote communication, avoid misunderstanding, miscommunication, and to stabilize bilateral businesses. We know that China and the U.S. are one of the biggest trading partnerships in the world, and they are definitely vital to each other. And I believe that the U.S. wouldn't definitely miss out these leading markets. According to some experts that I've spoken to, the two sides remain skeptical about whether there will be any major breakthroughs, any tangible results coming out from her visit. But some also say that it's even more important that they are at least talking, which is in itself is positive. That's all for me. Back to you.
Zheng Chungying, our correspondent in Beijing, thank you very much. Israeli forces have killed 2 Palestinians in another raid in the occupied West Bank. The Israeli military said the pair were suspected of carrying out a gun attack against Israeli police this week. The raid on the city of Nablus follows a large-scale military assault on targets in the Jenin refugee camp that left 12 Palestinians dead and more than 100 people injured. There's been flash flooding in northeastern Spain after torrential rain and hail hit the region. In Zaragoza, motorists became stranded as the streets were flooded, but there are no reports of injuries. Weather warnings have been issued for 5 regions, with storms, hail and strong winds forecast for much of the northeast of the country. Twitter has threatened to sue Facebook owner Meta over its rival text app Threads. It accuses Meta of hiring dozens of its former engineers, using their knowledge to set up the platform. Meta denies the claim, saying no one in the app's engineering team used to work at Twitter. Over 30 million people have now reportedly signed up to Threads since it was launched on Wednesday. Germany will not send cluster bombs to Ukraine after the United States signalled it was considering including them in its latest arms package. The Defence Minister, Boris Pistorius, says exporting the weapons is not an option for Germany. Cluster bombs spread smaller explosives indiscriminately over a wide area. Germany is a signatory to an international convention which bans their production, stockpiling and transfer. The United States is not a signatory and says cluster bombs have a clear military utility in combat. President Volodymyr Zelensky has repeated his appeal for countries to send long-range weapons. He's been meeting the Czech Prime Minister in Prague and says defending Ukraine would prove very difficult without long-range missiles. Zelensky, who's due to visit Turkey later, said the decision on such weapons depends only on the United States.
This means that you're defending your land and you cannot reach the appropriate distance to destroy your enemy. So the enemy has a distinct advantage. This is why it's important, not only for offensive, but for defensive actions of our military. Long-range weapons is not a new topic. We're talking about the appropriate weapons with our partners.
Well, events in Russia over the last couple of weeks are likely to have a ripple effect. Thousands of miles away in Africa, the private military company behind the attempted mutiny, the Wagner Group, also has operations in Africa. But with the group's future in Russia unclear, so are its African enterprises. Our correspondent Robert Nagila reports.
It's been 2 weeks since a short-lived rebellion by the Russian private military contractor, the Wagner Group, in Russia. But with its future uncertain, questions linger over the Wagner Group's operations in Africa. Experts say the events in Russia could have far-reaching ramifications on the African continent. The Wagner Group has been assisting several African countries, including Mali and the Central African Republic, in dealing with their internal conflicts.
Well, they're significant because they're going to impact on certain countries, particularly countries such as Mali, countries such as the Central African Republic, where they've been providing security in the absence of a proper functioning national army.
Only last week, the United Nations Security Council voted to end the UN peacekeeping mission in Mali following a demand from the government. In 2021, France announced the withdrawal of its forces from Mali following 2 military coups and citing the alleged presence of the Wagner Group.
Substantially, people are convinced that the missions have not produced the intended result, which is supposed to be enhanced peace.
With the Wagner Group's future role in Africa unclear, some experts believe this could be the beginning of a renewed push by African member states in resolving the continent's conflicts.
You're likely to see an emboldened African Union. You're likely to see other countries coming in because, certainly whether we like it or not, the destabilization of a Wagner Group has presented new political opportunities for Africa, most of whom have been complaining about the advent of the Wagner Group in Africa.
Later this month, Russia is set to host the second Russia-Africa Summit in St. Petersburg. While trade and economic cooperation will headline the summit, security is likely to feature just as prominently on the back of recent events in Russia. Bobot Nagila, CGTN, Nairobi, Kenya.
You're watching CGTN. Still ahead, new goals for the community football project, turning around young people's lives in Brazil's slums.
Ever wondered what's the difference between a bear and a bull market? Where are the cash cows? And who are the lame ducks? And what exactly are black swans? Grey rhinos? And unicorn companies? Make sense of it all with Global Business, only on CGTN.
There's a new agenda for a new world, accelerating change in almost every part of our lives. It's shifting the norms of how we work, travel, and connect. How we think, interact, and develop. It's a new reality, a new agenda with me, Juliet Mann.
Hello, welcome back. A reminder of our top stories. China tells the US Treasury Secretary relations must get back on track. Janet Yellen says the United States wants to diversify rather than decouple. South Korea's government says it respects a decision by the United Nations nuclear watchdog to allow the release of treated wastewater from the Fukushima nuclear power station into the ocean. Reactors at the plant in Japan were destroyed by an earthquake and tsunami in 2011. The plan to release the water has sparked concern among neighbouring countries, with China announcing a ban on food imports from 10 Japanese regions. The head of the International Atomic Agency says he understands the concerns but maintains it's safe.
I think it's logical that people that are not experts in these matters, they see all these tanks full of water. They learn that these tanks are, the water there has some elements there that could be bad. And they learn that this water is going to go to the ocean. So it's entirely logical that there are concerns.
Well, a number of Pacific Island nations are still said to be considering their options over the decision to release this wastewater from Fukushima. The head of the UN's nuclear watchdog is expected to travel to New Zealand and the Cook Islands to try to ease concerns there. Our correspondent Greg Navarro reports.
This is a plan Pacific Island nations have opposed since it was first proposed about 2 years ago. Japan plans to release the equivalent of about 500 Olympic-sized swimming pools worth of treated nuclear wastewater that's been used to cool the damaged reactors at the Fukushima nuclear power plant since it was hit by a powerful earthquake and tsunami in 2011. Japan says the accumulated wastewater is hindering its ability to decommission the plant. This week, the International Atomic Energy Agency endorsed Japan's plan to treat the water and gradually release it into the Pacific Ocean over the next 30 years. Pacific Islands nations have voiced their concern about the impact to what is essentially their livelihoods, the ocean, and the marine animals that sustain these countries. The Pacific Islands Forum, which represents the interests of about 18 countries, hired a panel of independent nuclear experts who remain concerned over what they say is the plant's lack of research into the impact of the discharge on marine species. And some of the Pacific Islands, including the Marshall Islands, are still dealing with the effects of nuclear weapons testing by the US and the UK, from last century. Now, while some scientists have backed the plan and say the practice of releasing treated nuclear wastewater into oceans is common, the Pacific Islands Forum is reportedly considering its options to oppose the move, including a possible meeting with the International Atomic Energy Agency next week. And if you consider that about 98% of the area Pacific Island countries occupy is ocean, then you get a sense of why these countries get worried about anything that could potentially impact its health. Greg Navarro, CGTN, Sydney.
Search operations are continuing after severe flooding in areas surrounding the Chinese city of Chongqing. At least 17 people are now known to have been killed in one district alone, and rescuers are in a race against time to find survivors with more rain forecast. Our correspondent Guo Tianqi reports.
This place used to be a cornfield of Shatan village, but it was destroyed by the huge flood coming that way. The water washed away all the soil and crops and part of the road foundation.
This is the town of Changtan, which saw a record 261 millimeters of rainfall in one day. The missing are all from this area. As floodwaters receded, some of the villagers returned to check what was left of their animals and fields.
My house was flooded to this height. My chickens and pigs were washed away. Very scary.
The village road has been blocked by a huge landslide. Even the rescue vehicle can barely get through. For houses in low-lying area, the situation is more severe.
This toilet was fully submerged. This is the mud left by the flood. The roof floor is still wet. We use this board to prevent water from flowing in.
Heavy rain and flooding has damaged 200 houses in Wanzhou district. Most of the killed were buried by a landslide or collapsed homes. Mountain areas at risk of new landslides are cordoned off to prevent people from passing through.
We walked for 15 kilometers to find water for about 200 villagers because the water supply will not be restored until tomorrow.
Moderate to heavy rain is expected over the coming days. The village committee says it's evacuating residents to Changtan Middle School, which is being used as a temporary shelter.
The European Union is drawing up plans for a $1.1 billion aid package for Tunisia. It's aimed at helping the country improve border controls and reduce human trafficking. But Tunisia will have to agree to economic reforms before receiving this money. Our correspondent Alex Cadier reports.
The European Union wants to build stronger partnerships with North Africa in a bid to get a handle on migrants crossing the Mediterranean. The EU is drawing up plans to provide nearly €1 billion in aid to Tunisia to help boost the country's economy and help on its path to reform. €105 million will also be dedicated to bolstering Tunisia's border management efforts, including cracking down on human trafficking and boosting search and rescue efforts in the Mediterranean. On a recent trip to Tunis with the Italian and Dutch Prime Ministers, EU Commission President Ursula von der Leyen said an agreement with Tunisia was crucial.
Against the backdrop of global uncertainties, it is in our common interest to strengthen our relationship and to invest in stability and prosperity. And this is why we are here. And this is why we're working with Tunisia on a comprehensive package.
A deal with Tunisia would also be valuable for Italy's attempts to process migrants landing on its shores. Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni is eager to reach a deal to repatriate rejected asylum seekers to Tunisia in order to ease the pressure on Italy's shores. But a recent rise in tensions between migrants and local populations in Tunisia could make a broader deal more challenging. NGOs like Amnesty International have said the country's president has launched an escalating attack on human rights, particularly targeting sub-Saharan migrants in the country. Nevertheless, the EU is pushing ahead with this deal, going even further and saying that the Tunisia deal could be a blueprint for agreements with other countries in the region. Alex Cadier, CGTN, Brussels.
Deforestation in the Brazilian Amazon has fallen by more than a third since the start of the year. Trees are being felled at the lowest rate in 4 years. This is according to government data. However, analysts say illegal land clearance remains a major problem. President Lula da Silva has committed to halting deforestation by 2030. His predecessor, Jair Bolsonaro, ditched many policies restricting commercial exploitation of the rainforest. The president of World Athletics says London's poor air quality could see it ruled out of hosting major sporting events. Sebastian Coe, who led the British capital's successful bid to host the 2012 Olympics, added that the rising global temperatures as a result of climate change may also force major events to be rescheduled to avoid extreme weather. 6 people have died at a fire at a retirement home in Milan. Dozens of residents are injured, 3 in a critical condition. The fire started on the first floor but didn't spread to the rest of the building. However, a large amount of toxic fumes were produced, causing some of the deaths. 5 cases of locally acquired malaria have been confirmed in the United States, the first cases in 2 decades. Health officials in Florida and Texas have issued health alerts but say the risk of contracting the disease remains low. Our correspondent Tony Waterman reports.
An unwelcome nuisance at any time of the year, Americans now have another reason to avoid the pesky mosquito this summer. 5 cases of malaria have been detected in the past 2 months, 4 in Florida and 1 in Texas, spread by the long-legged, bloodthirsty Anopheles mosquito.
It's a concern because malaria is a life-threatening disease. It's not often seen in the United States, and we haven't seen it domestically acquired in over 20 years.
For decades, the cases found in the U.S. were people who had picked it up while traveling abroad. The local spread now prompting an alert from the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, urging doctors treating unexplained fevers to consider malaria, regardless of the patient's travel history.
It's not something everyone needs to be panicked about. It's very low risk at this point, but certainly if you develop any unexplained fever or symptoms, then talk to your doctor.
None of the locally acquired cases have been fatal, but according to the World Health Organization, more than 600,000 people globally die from malaria every year, the vast majority in Africa, with children particularly vulnerable. Besides malaria, mosquitoes can carry other life-threatening diseases like yellow fever, dengue, and West Nile, making them among the deadliest creatures on the planet. They thrive in hot, humid climates, and as global temperatures rise, mosquitoes are migrating to new, warmer locations, bringing with them deadly diseases. Scientific studies show other species of disease-bearing mosquitoes are migrating north in the U.S.
So as you get some of the changes in the temperature and climate, different sort of these mosquitoes and maybe moving further north, those in particular that are most likely to transmit malaria.
Experts say prevention is key, encouraging people to use bug repellent, cover up while outdoors, and avoid being out at dusk and dawn when mosquitoes are most active. Not getting bitten in the first place, the easiest way to avoid getting sick. Tony Waterman, CGTN, Austin, Texas.
China's crayfish capital has thousands of restaurants, all offering diners a chance to enjoy the local speciality. But one business is trying to stand out from the crowd, serving up a new variety of the fish, which it brings straight from breeding farms to its kitchens. Our correspondent Chen Tong reports.
8 o'clock in the morning. 4 boxes of a new variety of crayfish are departing from the breeding center. After 2 hours' drive, they've arrived at their destination, the provincial capital of Jiangsu, Nanjing. This is the direct sale store owned by the Xuyi Crayfish Group, which just opened this March. This is also so far the only store where diners can enjoy the new breed.
This signage here is proudly telling people it's the first direct sale store owned by Xuyi Crayfish Group. But apart from this sign, the decorations here have no difference with other franchise ones.
The store manager told me it's not actively telling diners the crayfish here are the new breed either.
Our store name is Xu Xiaolong, Xuyi Crayfish Nanjing Direct Sales Store, which emphasizes the 2 words of direct sale. Our crayfish are freshly shipped from Xuyi every morning.
In the little county of Xuyi, there are some 2,000 crayfish restaurants. Some are franchise ones and some are little private shops. Why did the state-owned Xuyi Crayfish Group suddenly decide to open a low-profile restaurant and run it by itself?
We won't start from Nanjing and then spread it to large cities because there are more consumers in large cities with better promotion possibilities. So we wanted to begin from large cities.
The key word is promotion. Xuyi has a long history of breeding crayfish, but it's facing fierce competition from another crayfish production center in China's central province of Hubei, Qianjiang, which has a more mature crayfish processing industry. The Xuyi Crayfish Group says it's not planning to open any direct sale stores in Xuyi, only in large cities. It's obvious that a direct sale store does not seek to replace existing restaurants, but only to let more people in China know that Xuyi has a crayfish specialty.
Our correspondent Cheng Tong reporting. Now, its goals were simple: to give deprived children living in Brazil's slums the chance to play football. Things have gone so well that the club is considering turning professional. Sponsored by the Brazil-China Cultural Institute, its owner says the club's ambitions extend far beyond football. Our correspondent Paulo Cabral reports.
This football pitch sits in the heart of São Paulo's largest slum, Heliópolis, with estimated 200,000 inhabitants. Nawan and his grandmother are among them, living in a small home in one of the narrow alleys. For hundreds of kids and teenagers like Nawan, the football social project created by the Brazil-China Cultural Institute, IBRA China, on this pitch helps to fuel the dreams of having a better life.
Acho que de toda mãe, todo pai, toda família é sonho de filho ser jogador de futebol.
I think all mothers and fathers dream of their kids becoming a football player and being able to help improve the family's life, right? We all have dreams. I dream of the day I will be a big player, appear on TV. It must be really good.
Every year, about 300 children and teenagers, mostly from the Heliópolis region, are selected to learn and practice football. The coach says he would like to find talented kids, but that the goal is much broader.
Some 300 kids enroll every year in our project. Very few of them will actually become players. Maybe 5 or 10 at the most. That would be a lot already. What's important to us is that they become good people.
The most talented and dedicated players from the social project in Heliópolis may end up here in IBRA China's arena, training with the main team. Currently, the team plays in São Paulo's amateur leagues for players under 20 years old, and despite its recent beginnings, the team has drawn attention for its good performance.
We want the best for these kids, so we give them infrastructure so they can perform well. We keep track of their studying also and how they're doing in school. So here's a priority: doing well at school.
IBRA China's plan in the long run is to make this a professional team, but in the meantime it can already claim a big victory in helping to create a better future for these young players. Paulo Cabral, CGTN, São Paulo.
And that is full time. That is the world today. Thank you for watching. We're back with more news at the top of this hour. Coming up next, it's World Insight. For now, from all of the team in London, it's goodbye.